He believed embarrassing one quiet employee would remind everyone who was in charge, but before the week was over, the woman he dismissed would become the only reason his company remained standing. The top floor of Donovan Technologies overlooked the morning skyline as sunlight reflected across walls of glass and polished steel, giving the headquarters the appearance of absolute success. Employees hurried through bright corridors carrying laptops, reports, and fresh coffee, while elevator doors opened and closed with perfect rhythm. Inside the executive conference room, dozens of department managers and team leaders settled into their seats as a giant presentation screen displayed quarterly projections that would shape the company's future. At the far end of the room stood Michael Donovan, the 54-year-old founder and chief executive officer whose reputation for demanding excellence had built one of the fastest-growing technology firms in the country. His tailored navy suit, silver hair, and calm but commanding voice left little doubt that he expected perfection from everyone around him. Among the employees taking notes near the back of the room sat Emma Brooks, a quiet 25-year-old administrative analyst wearing a simple light blue sweater, dark jeans, and comfortable shoes. She carried herself with quiet confidence, never drawing attention to herself despite arriving early every morning and leaving long after most of the office lights had gone dark. Few people knew that she spent her evenings caring for her aging father before returning home to prepare for the next workday. To many executives, she was simply another junior employee whose name rarely appeared during important meetings. As Michael confidently outlined an ambitious expansion strategy, financial charts filled the screen behind him. Investors expected rapid growth, new acquisitions, and record profits. Around the room, executives nodded with approval while assistants recorded every instruction. Emma carefully compared the projected numbers against several internal reports she had organized the previous evening. Something felt wrong. One series of operating expenses did not match the supporting records she had reviewed only hours earlier. She checked the figures once more before quietly raising her hand. The room remained focused on the presentation until Michael noticed the movement. He paused and looked toward the back of the room with visible impatience. "Yes," he asked. Emma stood respectfully. "Excuse me, Mr. Donovan. I believe there may be a discrepancy in the expense projections shown on the third quarter report. I may be mistaken, but I thought it would be helpful to mention it before we continue." For a brief moment, complete silence settled across the conference room. Michael glanced at the screen before looking back at Emma. A faint smile crossed his face, but it carried no warmth. "Miss Brooks," he said evenly, "strategy meetings are led by executive leadership. Your responsibility is administrative support, not corporate forecasting." A few uncomfortable glances passed between employees. Emma lowered her hand but remained composed. "I understand, sir. I only wanted to make sure the information was accurate." Michael folded his hands confidently. "Leave strategic decisions to people who have the experience to make them." The words echoed through the room with quiet finality. No one defended her. No one questioned him. Emma simply nodded, wrote one final note in the margin of her report, and listened without another interruption. As the meeting continued, Michael believed he had protected the authority of his leadership. What he could not possibly know was that the overlooked numbers on Emma's desk were the first visible signs of a hidden crisis already moving silently through his company. And the employee he had just dismissed was the only person who had noticed it before disaster arrived. The meeting ended with polite applause, but Emma Brooks left the conference room carrying far more than a notebook filled with figures. She carried the quiet weight of knowing something did not fit together, even if no one else seemed willing to notice. Around her, employees gathered near the coffee station, discussing expansion plans, executive speeches, and exciting opportunities that seemed certain to arrive before the end of the year. A few coworkers offered Emma sympathetic smiles after witnessing the exchange with Michael Donovan, but she simply returned the gesture and continued toward her desk without a single complaint. She had learned long ago that dignity rarely needed defending with words. It revealed itself through actions repeated day after day. Her workstation sat near the operations department, surrounded by filing cabinets, computer monitors, and neatly labeled project binders. While others hurried to lunch, Emma quietly organized invoices, updated compliance records, and corrected several formatting errors in reports prepared by another department. She never mentioned the mistakes or asked for recognition after fixing them. Helping the company succeed had become a habit rather than an obligation. Shortly after noon, one of the new employees approached her desk looking overwhelmed by an unfamiliar reporting system. Emma stopped what she was doing, patiently explained every step, and stayed beside him until he understood the process. When he thanked her for saving him from making a costly mistake, she simply smiled and replied, "Someone helped me when I started. I am only passing that kindness forward." As the afternoon sunlight stretched across the office floor, Emma quietly reopened the financial reports from the executive meeting. She compared vendor payments, operating expenses, and internal summaries one line at a time. The numbers still refused to agree. Instead of assuming someone else would solve the problem, she highlighted the inconsistencies and carefully saved her notes in a secure company folder according to established procedures. She never imagined those ordinary records would soon become more valuable than anyone realized. When the workday finally ended, most employees headed home or met friends for dinner, but Emma boarded a city bus carrying a reusable grocery bag filled with fresh vegetables, bread, and medication. She stepped off several miles away in a quiet neighborhood where modest homes lined peaceful streets beneath rows of maple trees. Inside one small house waited her father, Robert Brooks, whose health had declined over the past 2 years. Emma prepared a warm dinner, organized his medicine, listened patiently as he shared stories from earlier days, and laughed gently at jokes she had heard many times before. Although money was often tight and sleep was sometimes scarce, she never allowed those burdens to harden her spirit. Before going to bed, she opened her laptop at the kitchen table and reviewed the same financial reports one final time. The inconsistencies remained exactly where she had first discovered them. She closed the computer, looked quietly through the window at the still evening sky, and whispered to herself, "There has to be an explanation." Across the city, high above the glowing skyline, Michael Donovan stood alone inside his executive office studying ambitious expansion schedules with complete confidence. He believed the greatest challenges facing his company were competition and market pressure. He never imagined that the first warning had already appeared inside a report prepared by the quiet young employee he had chosen to dismiss instead of hearing her out. The following morning, Donovan Technologies returned to its usual rhythm of polished efficiency. Elevators filled with employees carrying laptops and coffee cups, reception phones rang without pause, and digital dashboards displayed ambitious performance goals across the open office. To most people, it was simply another productive day. To Emma Brooks, however, the unanswered numbers from the previous afternoon continued to occupy every quiet moment of her thoughts. She arrived nearly an hour before the official start of the workday, just as she always did, using the peaceful silence of the nearly empty office to organize reports before meetings began. She logged into the financial database and carefully compared payment records from several departments. The discrepancy had not disappeared. In fact, it had quietly grown larger overnight after another batch of transactions had been processed. Emma leaned back in her chair, studying the screen without panic. She knew that unusual figures did not always mean dishonesty. Sometimes they were nothing more than simple accounting delays or data entry mistakes. Even so, company policy encouraged employees to report irregularities instead of ignoring them. She opened the internal reporting system and prepared a short summary explaining exactly what she had found, attaching only verified records and avoiding speculation. Before sending the report, she reviewed every sentence twice to ensure complete accuracy. She believed facts deserved careful respect. Moments later, her immediate supervisor, Karen Mitchell, stopped beside her desk while reviewing the morning schedule. Emma politely explained the situation and asked whether the information should be forwarded to the finance department. Karen glanced quickly through the documents before offering a reassuring smile. "You have always been thorough, Emma," she said kindly. "I will make sure the right people see this." Emma thanked her and returned to work, believing the proper process had begun. Several floors above them, inside an executive office overlooking the city, Chief Financial Officer Richard Lawson reviewed the same financial records after Karen's message reached his inbox. Unlike Emma, Richard immediately recognized the significance of the discrepancies. They pointed toward a series of unauthorized transfers that had been carefully hidden among legitimate operating expenses over several months. His confident expression faded for only an instant before he calmly closed the file and quietly moved Emma's report into a low-priority review folder where it would attract as little attention as possible. Then he instructed his assistant to tell Karen that the numbers had already been verified and required no further action. By late afternoon, Karen returned to Emma's desk with the response. "Finance reviewed everything," she said with a relieved smile. "They confirmed the reports are accurate." Emma looked down at her printed copies. Every instinct told her otherwise. She had checked the records repeatedly, and the inconsistencies remained impossible to explain. Still, she respected the chain of responsibility within the company. She nodded politely and continued working, though she quietly saved copies of every supporting document according to standard company retention procedures before the files could be updated again. She did not do so because she distrusted anyone. She simply believed that careful documentation protected both employees and the company itself. Across the office, Richard Lawson watched through the glass walls as Emma organized her folders with the same calm discipline she showed every day. He assumed she had accepted the explanation and moved on. What he failed to understand was that true loyalty does not disappear when someone refuses to listen. It simply continues doing what is right until the truth has nowhere left to hide. By Thursday afternoon, the polished confidence that usually filled Donovan Technologies had begun to feel strangely fragile, even though almost no one could explain why. Executives moved quickly between conference rooms preparing for an important external compliance review scheduled for the following week, while department managers rushed to finalize financial summaries requested by investors. The atmosphere remained professional, but beneath the surface an invisible current of tension had begun moving quietly through the building. Emma Brooks noticed it the moment she arrived at her desk. Several financial files she had carefully documented the previous day had suddenly been updated overnight. The totals no longer matched the copies she had saved according to company policy. Instead of feeling alarmed, she calmly opened both versions side by side and compared every line. Entire payment references had disappeared. Vendor identification numbers had changed. Approval dates had been adjusted by only a few hours, subtle enough that most employees would never have noticed. Emma quietly printed both versions, highlighted the differences, and secured them inside a dated company records folder. She understood that every legitimate organization occasionally corrected accounting errors, but changes made without clear documentation deserved careful attention. Late that afternoon, she gathered enough confidence to request a brief appointment with Michael Donovan's executive assistant. After waiting patiently outside the executive offices, she was unexpectedly invited inside when a meeting ended earlier than planned. Michael stood beside the conference table reviewing expansion plans while several senior executives gathered their papers before leaving the room. Emma respectfully remained near the doorway until he acknowledged her presence. "Yes, Miss Brooks," he asked without looking up from the documents in his hands. Emma held the folder carefully against her chest. "Mr. Donovan, I believe I have identified several financial records that may require your personal attention. I know they have already been reviewed, but additional changes appeared overnight, and I thought you should be aware before next week's compliance review." Michael slowly raised his eyes toward her. His expression revealed more impatience than curiosity. "The finance department has already confirmed those reports," he replied evenly. "I trust the professionals responsible for those decisions." Emma nodded politely. "I understand, sir. I only hoped you might compare these versions before signing the final approvals." Michael glanced briefly at the folder without reaching for it. Miss Brooks, successful companies function because employees respect established responsibilities. If every staff member questioned executive decisions, nothing would ever be accomplished. The room became uncomfortably quiet. Two senior managers paused beside the doorway, pretending to organize their briefcases while listening from a respectful distance. Emma lowered the folder slightly but remained composed. "My intention is only to protect the company," she answered softly. Michael offered a restrained smile that carried unmistakable finality. "Your loyalty is appreciated. Your judgment in executive financial matters is not required." Emma accepted his decision without another word. She thanked him for his time, turned calmly, and walked back toward the elevators with the folder still in her hands. Behind the glass walls of another executive office, Richard Lawson quietly watched the entire exchange unfold. A faint look of relief crossed his face as Emma disappeared down the hallway. He believed the final obstacle had been removed. What neither he nor Michael realized was that loyalty does not depend on recognition, and the careful records Emma continued preserving according to company policy were about to become the only complete history of transactions that someone inside the company was desperately trying to erase. Friday morning arrived beneath a gray sky that seemed to mirror the quiet uncertainty growing inside Donovan Technologies. Although employees greeted one another with familiar smiles and the lobby remained as polished as ever, conversations carried an unfamiliar tension. News had spread that an independent compliance team would begin reviewing company financial records on Monday morning, and every department had been instructed to verify documentation before the end of the business day. Emma Brooks quietly settled into her workstation as she always did, organizing reports with calm precision while the office around her became increasingly restless. Throughout the morning, managers requested updated files, accounting teams exchanged urgent electronic messages, and printers ran almost without interruption. Emma noticed something unusual almost immediately. Several digital records that had existed only the day before were now marked as archived, while others had disappeared from the shared database entirely. Fortunately, the secure copies she had created according to company policy remained carefully stored inside the authorized records folder she maintained for audit support. She opened each document one at a time, comparing timestamps, approval histories, and payment references. The pattern had become impossible to ignore. Every altered record connected to the same sequence of financial transfers she had first questioned during the executive meeting earlier that week. Around noon, Karen Mitchell hurried toward Emma's desk with visible concern. "The finance department is asking whether you still have your earlier working files," she said quietly. "Some records cannot be located." Emma nodded without hesitation. "I saved everything according to the retention guidelines." Karen released a small sigh of relief. "Please keep those files secure. Someone from compliance may request them." Emma agreed immediately. She felt no satisfaction in being correct. Instead, she felt an even greater responsibility to protect the company she had worked so hard to support. Several coworkers whispered that this might be the perfect opportunity to distance herself from the organization after everything that had happened with Michael Donovan. One colleague even suggested that another technology company would gladly hire someone with Emma's reputation for careful work. Emma smiled politely before answering with complete sincerity. "This company trusted me with my first professional opportunity. I cannot walk away simply because the situation has become difficult." Her quiet words surprised everyone standing nearby. Loyalty to Emma was never dependent upon receiving recognition. It was measured by what a person chose to do when remaining faithful required sacrifice instead of comfort. Late that afternoon, while most employees rushed to finish assignments before the weekend, Emma carefully organized every verified record into chronological order, adding clear notes explaining where each version had originated and when each modification had appeared. She made no accusations and drew no conclusions. She simply preserved the facts exactly as they existed. On the top floor of the building, Michael Donovan prepared for an important conference call with investors, still unaware that the missing financial history now existed in only one complete location inside the entire company. From behind the closed door of his executive office, Richard Lawson quietly reviewed system logs showing which employees had recently accessed archived files. When Emma Brooks's name appeared several times, his confident expression slowly faded. For the first time since the discrepancies had begun, he realized that the quiet young employee everyone had underestimated was no longer simply asking questions. Without realizing it herself, she had become the final guardian of the evidence that could determine whether Donovan Technologies survived the coming week with its reputation intact. Monday morning arrived with unusual stillness inside Donovan Technologies. The bright lobby remained spotless, the coffee stations were full, and employees greeted one another politely yet. Beneath the familiar routine, everyone sensed that something important was about to happen. Shortly after 8 o'clock, the independent compliance team entered the building carrying secure document cases and identification badges. Their arrival transformed ordinary conversations into quiet whispers as department managers escorted them toward the executive conference floor. Michael Donovan stood near the entrance, welcoming the visitors with the composed confidence that had guided him through countless negotiations over the years. He believed every department had completed its responsibilities and expected the review to confirm the company's strong reputation. Across the operations floor, Emma Brooks quietly finished organizing the carefully preserved records she had maintained throughout the previous week. Every document had been arranged in chronological order, every revision clearly marked, and every supporting report cross-referenced according to company retention procedures. She hoped none of it would be needed. She wanted the review to conclude successfully because Donovan Technologies represented far more than a paycheck. It had given her an opportunity to build a meaningful career while supporting her father through difficult years. As the compliance specialists began requesting financial documentation, department representatives confidently provided digital records through the company's internal archive. Minutes later, an unexpected silence settled across the conference room. Several transaction histories could not be located. Entire approval records appeared incomplete, while multiple payment authorizations no longer matched archive summaries submitted only days earlier. One compliance director calmly asked whether backup documentation existed. Richard Lawson answered before anyone else could speak. The system migration probably affected a small number of historical files. Our information technology department is already investigating. His explanation sounded polished, but it failed to answer the growing list of questions appearing before the reviewers. Michael's expression gradually changed as additional inconsistencies surfaced one after another. For the first time since founding the company, he looked genuinely uncertain. Downstairs, Karen Mitchell received an urgent telephone call requesting every retained working document related to the disputed financial reports. She immediately turned toward Emma. "They need everything you saved." Emma quietly nodded, lifted the organized records folder from her desk, and followed Karen upstairs without hesitation. When she entered the conference room, every conversation stopped. The compliance team looked toward the neatly labeled folders in her hands, while Michael slowly recognized the same employee whose concerns he had dismissed only days earlier. Emma respectfully placed the records on the conference table. "These are the original versions I retained according to company policy," she explained calmly. "Each revision is organized by date and includes the corresponding approval history." One senior compliance reviewer carefully opened the first folder before comparing its contents with the incomplete electronic records already displayed on the conference screen. Within moments, the missing transaction history began to reappear page by page. Every alteration could now be traced in its proper sequence. The room became completely silent except for the soft turning of paper. Michael watched without speaking as the careful work of one quiet employee restored information that the company itself could no longer retrieve. Richard Lawson remained motionless, his confident posture slowly disappearing as each verified record answered another unanswered question. Emma stood quietly beside the conference table expecting nothing in return. She had not come to prove anyone wrong. She had simply come to protect the company she had always believed deserved the truth, even after the people leading it had refused to believe in her. The conference room remained silent as the compliance specialists continued reviewing every page Emma Brooks had preserved with patient precision. One document after another confirmed a pattern that could no longer be dismissed as ordinary accounting mistakes. Original approval records matched Emma's copies perfectly, while the altered digital files revealed changes that had appeared only after the original transactions had been completed. No one spoke for several long moments. Even the quiet hum of the projector seemed unusually loud against the weight of the unfolding truth. Michael Donovan slowly looked from the documents to Emma, then back to the compliance team. The confidence that had always defined his leadership had given way to careful reflection. A senior compliance director finally closed one of the folders and addressed the room in a calm, measured voice. These retained records provide a complete audit history. Without them, verifying the accuracy of these transactions would have been extremely difficult. Several executives exchanged uneasy glances. They all understood the significance of those words. The company's credibility, years of hard work, and the confidence of investors had depended upon information that only one quiet employee had chosen to preserve according to company policy. Richard Lawson remained seated with his hands folded, though the certainty that usually marked his expression had completely disappeared. Additional questions followed regarding authorization dates, vendor approvals, and document revisions. Each answer pointed investigators toward the same conclusion. The missing history had not vanished by accident. It had been intentionally altered after the original records were created. Michael listened carefully without interrupting. Every new finding reminded him of the moment Emma had respectfully raised her hand during the executive meeting only days earlier. He remembered dismissing her concern before even looking at the evidence she had tried to present. That memory now weighed heavier than any financial report on the table. One compliance specialist requested access to the archived metadata preserved alongside Emma's retained files. Emma quietly explained how she had followed the company's retention guidelines by saving every approved version before routine updates occurred. She spoke without pride or accusation, answering each question with calm professionalism. The reviewers thanked her repeatedly for the clarity of her documentation. Around the conference table, senior managers who had once overlooked her now listened with genuine respect. Michael finally turned toward Emma. For several seconds, he searched for words, but found none that seemed large enough to match the moment. His eyes settled on the neatly organized folders resting before him, tangible proof that loyalty often works quietly while seeking no recognition at all. The compliance director carefully gathered the completed records before offering a reassuring conclusion. Based on the documentation provided today, the review can continue with confidence. The preserved records have prevented a far more serious outcome. A quiet breath of relief spread across the room. Investors waiting for updates would receive verified information instead of uncertainty. Employees who had spent years building the company could continue their work without the shadow of unanswered questions. Michael remained standing after everyone else began gathering their papers. He watched Emma organize the folders with the same humble care she had shown from the beginning, never once asking for credit or reminding anyone how she had been treated. In that silent moment, he realized the greatest strength inside Donovan Technologies had never been found in executive offices, ambitious strategies, or impressive financial forecasts. It had been quietly sitting at a modest desk, protected by the unwavering integrity of the one employee he had underestimated from the very beginning. Later that afternoon, the executive conference room had become remarkably quieter than it had been at the beginning of the compliance review. Most of the investigators had completed their work, investors had received reassuring updates, and department managers slowly returned to their offices with visible relief. The crisis that had threatened months of preparation had been contained, not because of an expensive recovery plan or a brilliant executive decision, but because one employee had quietly chosen to preserve the truth when no one else believed it would matter. Emma Brooks carefully gathered the remaining folders from the conference table, making certain every document was returned to its proper file before leaving the room. She expected nothing more than another ordinary afternoon of work. As she reached the doorway, Michael Donovan spoke for the first time since the review had concluded. "Miss Brooks, would you stay for a moment?" The room became still once again. Emma turned politely and nodded. The last few executives quietly remained seated, sensing that an important conversation was about to unfold. Michael slowly walked around the conference table until he stood only a few feet away from her. His confident posture remained, but the pride that had once shaped every word had been replaced by genuine humility. He looked directly into Emma's eyes before speaking. "When you tried to warn me last week, I never looked at your evidence. I only looked at your position within this company." Emma listened silently without interrupting. Michael lowered his eyes for a brief moment before continuing. "I believed experience automatically made my judgment better than yours. Today I learned that integrity sees things pride refuses to notice." No one in the room moved. The silence carried more weight than any speech. Emma answered with the same calm voice that had guided her through every difficult moment. "I understand the responsibility you carry. I only wanted to make certain the company had every opportunity to succeed." Michael nodded slowly. "After the way I spoke to you during that meeting, most people would have stopped trying to help. Many would have taken those records somewhere else or simply walked away." Emma offered a gentle smile. "This company gave me my first opportunity. It helped me support my father when we needed stability the most. I could not stand by and watch it fail because of one difficult conversation." Her words settled over the room with quiet grace. Several senior managers looked toward her with unmistakable admiration. Michael remained silent for several seconds before extending his hand. "Thank you," he said simply. "Not for saving a business, but for remaining loyal when I had not earned that loyalty." Emma shook his hand with quiet respect. "I was loyal to what was right," she replied. "Everything else followed from that." Michael allowed himself a faint smile, the first genuine one anyone in the room had seen all week. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, the late afternoon sunlight spread across the city skyline, filling the conference room with warm golden light. It seemed to soften every sharp edge that had defined the building only days earlier. As Emma quietly gathered her notebook and prepared to return to her desk, no one saw an ordinary administrative analyst leaving the room. They saw the person whose character had protected years of hard work, preserved the confidence of countless employees, and reminded every leader present that titles may command authority, but only integrity earns lasting respect. 2 days later, every employee at Donovan Technologies received an unexpected invitation to gather in the main atrium before the start of the workday. The spacious lobby, usually filled with hurried footsteps and quiet conversations, had been transformed into a place of reflection. Managers stood beside entryways, department leaders paused their morning routines, and employees from every floor assembled beneath the towering glass ceiling where sunlight streamed through the windows, filling the room with a calm golden glow. Emma Brooks quietly joined the group near the back, believing the gathering would focus on the successful completion of the compliance review. She carried the same notebook she brought to work every morning and expected nothing more than another ordinary day. Moments later, Michael Donovan stepped onto the small platform overlooking the atrium. He was dressed in the same tailored navy suit he always wore, but there was something unmistakably different about the way he carried himself. The confidence remained, yet it was now balanced by humility that everyone in the room could immediately recognize. After thanking the employees for their professionalism during the review, he paused for several long seconds before continuing. "There is someone I need to recognize today," he said. The room grew completely silent. Michael looked toward the back of the crowd until his eyes found Emma. "Miss Brooks, would you please come forward?" Surprised whispers spread gently through the atrium as Emma slowly walked toward the front. She stood quietly beside Michael, unsure why she had been called. Michael faced the assembled employees before speaking with complete honesty. "Last week, during an executive meeting, I dismissed an employee who had the courage to question information that deserved another look. I judged her title instead of her character. I believed leadership meant always having the answers. I was wrong." No one moved. Hundreds of employees listened without interruption. Michael continued, "When our company faced one of the most serious challenges in its history, the records that protected every employee, every client, And every investor existed because Emma Brooks quietly followed company policy with extraordinary integrity. She never sought recognition. She never stopped doing what was right. Most importantly, she remained loyal to this company even after I failed to show her the respect she deserved. The silence became even deeper. Several employees lowered their eyes, remembering the meeting where Emma had been publicly dismissed. Michael turned toward her. On behalf of this company and on behalf of myself, I sincerely apologize. Emma smiled gently before answering in the same calm voice everyone had come to admire. Thank you, Mr. Donovan. I believe every difficult moment gives us an opportunity to become better than we were before. Her words settled softly throughout the atrium. Michael presented her with a letter recognizing her exceptional professionalism and announcing her promotion to Senior Compliance Analyst, explaining that the position reflected not only her abilities, but also the trust she had earned through unwavering integrity. The employees responded with warm applause that echoed beneath the glass ceiling. Emma accepted the letter with gratitude, but her expression remained as humble as it had been on her very first day at the company. When the gathering ended, she quietly returned to her desk and began organizing the morning reports exactly as she always had. Nothing about her character had changed because others finally recognized her worth. The only thing that had truly changed was the way everyone else chose to see her. And as the morning sunlight filled the office once more, every person who had witnessed her journey understood a lesson far more valuable than success itself. Authority may lead an organization, but integrity is what quietly keeps it standing when everything else begins to fall.